All righty. Well, welcome. Thank you, everyone, to our latest edition of our Governing Principles webinar series. We're so excited to have you here to delve more into the critical topic of how career and technical education programs can work to engage historically underserved students. Before we get started, I wanted to start with a couple logistical notes for everyone. We'll be keeping everyone in the audience muted throughout, but we'd still love to hear from you. We have a couple different ways we can do that. A significant portion of our conversation today will be dedicated to answering your questions. So please be sure to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to get to as many of those as possible. We also welcome you to tweet throughout, whether you have questions or comments, please use our hashtag #GovPrinciples. Our team will be live tweeting throughout the day, so we hope you can join the discussion there on Twitter as well. Well, without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Hunt Institute's President and CEO, Dr. Javed Siddiqui, to open up the webinar. Over to you, Javed.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate you getting this coordinated for everybody, and thanks everybody for making time to be with us. I also want to do a special thanks and gratitude to Lieutenant Governor Rutherford, Dr. Sonia Santelises, Mrs. Kimberly Green, and the Honorable Alice Kane for taking time to be with us to share your insights this afternoon. At the Institute, we're fortunate to have Lieutenant Governor Rutherford as a member of our current Hunt Kane Leadership Fellows, and Alice is actually a senior advisor with us here, and she's been an invaluable asset to our work nationally. So thanks to all of you for being with us. Today's conversation, we're going to be delving into CTE. Career and technical education is a crucial option and pathway to success for many students across the country. In particular, we know that graduation rates for students in CTE pathways is 95%, which is 10% higher than the national average. This has certainly promising and exciting implications as we consider the possibilities of how these programs can support our most vulnerable students, not only keeping them enrolled and engaged in learning, but also connecting them to high-paying career opportunities for their futures. Our panelists today all have worked to expand CTE on behalf of historically underserved student populations at the state, the district, and the national level, both in policy and certainly in practice. And we're excited to hear their thoughts and their perspectives this afternoon. Now I'd like to formally introduce Alice Kane, who we are delighted to have on with us at the Institute. She's going to serve as our moderator today. Alice is a former Maryland State delegate, where she worked to advance educational opportunities and outcomes for students through her role on the Ways and Means Committee and the Education Subcommittee. Currently, Alice serves as a senior advisor with us, and as I've mentioned, she has been a true asset and invaluable to our work. So with that, I'll turn it over to our friend, Alice, to get the conversation started.
Thank you, Javed, and thank you so much to everyone joining us today as we explore why CTE programs are especially beneficial for underserved students. I'm going to make a few opening remarks and then turn it over to our excellent panel of Maryland leaders. We know historically underserved students are the most vulnerable students and face an increased likelihood of disengaging and dropping out of high school. This includes students who are Black, Latino, Native, and particularly boys who are at greater risk of dropping out than white and Asian students. We also know that enrollment in CTE courses significantly increases high school graduation rates, and it results in a higher percentage of students getting to and through college. This is true across demographics. Data from California shows us that while students enrolled in CTE courses are typically from lower achieving and lower socioeconomic standing than their peers, they are just as likely to enroll in post-secondary education and then have gone on to earn higher wages and have better careers as a result. As if that's not enough, data also shows us that career and technical education increases student engagement, school connectedness, and it reduces behavioral problems, suspensions, and expulsions. For all of these reasons, the National Dropout Prevention Center calls CTE essential for all students, and that's a quote. I would also add that with the pandemic and reports across the country, including in Maryland, about losing students as virtual school continues, is more important than ever and for our economic recovery that we find ways to re-engage these students. And CTE, I believe, is one of the very best ways we can do that to give them and our state the future that they and we deserve. So with that, I would love to introduce our phenomenal panel of Maryland leaders. We're going to start with our Lieutenant Governor, who I believe just celebrated the 6th anniversary of his swearing in as the 9th Lieutenant Governor of our state. He's led the state in partnership with Governor Larry Hogan, and from what I've observed, this is an issue that is particularly near and dear to him. Mr. Lieutenant Governor, we'd love to hear your opening remarks.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon to you, Delegate Kane, and thanks for that introduction. It's good to see Dr. Sandalises here, and all the wonderful work that she's doing. And Dr. Sandalises, and I'm going to just take this time to thank you, and I know you're getting some pressure out there. Stay strong, because we know that you're working for the kids. That's the most important thing. Again, I thank you for this opportunity to join you this afternoon. I want to thank the Hunt Institute for organizing this discussion and inviting me to participate. As I already thanked Dr. Kane, Dr. Sandalises, Ms. Green, thank you very much as well. CTE is, or career and technical education, is vital because it's a pathway to success and financial stability. CTE not only teaches technical and career skills, but also other intangible life skills like responsibility, time management, taking pride in your work and skills. And that extends beyond the classroom or the job setting. And in many cases, the skills that students in CTE programs learn lead to high-paying jobs, as well as entrepreneurial opportunities, and that builds generational wealth, which is why it is so important that we make these programs available to our students, particularly those from low-income backgrounds or those who may not be interested in going to college or traditional college focused education right away. And to ensure that we are able to give equal opportunity to being successful and lead the education system with a pathway, a path, and a purpose in life. With that, I would like to say thank you again, and I look forward to this afternoon's program and what I'm sure will be a very stimulating conversation and successful event.
Thank you, sir. Now we're going to turn to Dr. Sandalises, who I've known for at least a decade, maybe 2. And whatever hat she is wearing, I have always known her, as you've said, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, to be a true champion for kids, particularly underserved kids. Dr. Sandalises has been at the helm of Baltimore City for a little over 4 years now, and I know you all joined me in being thrilled that she signed on last year for another 4. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Sandalises for her opening remarks.
Well, thank you so much, Alice, and thank you, Lieutenant Governor, for your overall support, and particularly in this area of CTE. I consider it a privilege to be with this group here today. First, I think what's helpful is just to point out to folks that as we were speaking about the importance of CTE, some of the figures and demographics that Alice described at the beginning really do mirror our student population in Baltimore City. Roughly 77% of our students are Black, while another 15% are Latino. We also have 15% of our students who are identified with a disability, and 9% who are learning English as a second language. One of the things that I think really supports CTE in our city really is the broad spread community interest and support for CTE in the city over a period of time. Even 2 of our highest performing schools in the city have CTE courses, and believe me, folks would protest if we tried to take them away. We have another 3 CTE centers which have traditionally had entrance criteria. We are moving to expand those opportunities, and another 2 schools in which every student participates in a CTE pathway. Out of 21,000 high school students in Baltimore City Public Schools, 6,600 participate in a CTE pathway, and we are hoping to expand that by another 2,000 to 2,500 within the coming year. As Alice pointed out, some of the national figures we are seeing in Baltimore City as well, that our CTE students attend college at the same rate, if not at a little higher rate, as students across the district. And in 2018, we undertook a review of our CTE programming. The ABLE Foundation funded our work with Education Strategies Group. We did a deep dive into our CTE pathways, and we found that fewer than 10% of our students were graduating with certifications from our CTE pathways, and that 6 years after graduation, our students were only earning $15,000. So as a result, since 2018, we really have begun the process of re-envisioning our programming, aligning our CTE pathways with labor market projections, program success metrics, so that we can make sure that we are strategically serving our students and what the governor, and what the lieutenant governor, Lieutenant Governor Rutherford, but what the lieutenant governor referenced as really substantial salary and family sustaining wage possibilities that are connected to those courses. So one of the things that we're doing is expanding and being more strategic about how we're providing more students with disabilities and English language learners with these opportunities. We've hired a work-based learning team. One of the things that we heard from our young people in the study was that they wanted real life work opportunities. And we're working with our local community college in the areas to really think about how we can support career training in our schools to expand the capacity. We're thankful for the work with employers in revamping our curriculum and making sure that we have certification targets that really align with the skills that they want their employees to have. So I will stop there and turn it back to you, Alice.
Thank you. That is phenomenal to hear. Our third panelist, another Marylander, is Kim Green. She's the Executive Director of Advanced CTE, which is national advocacy organization working to advance career and technical education at the federal level and in the states. And Kim has just been a force of nature on this issue for many years. So I am happy to turn it over to you, Kim, for your opening remarks.
Thanks, Alice. And I am honored to be on this panel of Marylanders. I live in Rockville, and while I am not an expert in Maryland, our organization is also headquartered in Maryland. So I feel like I am kind of honorary in some ways. Our organization, Advanced CTE, is celebrating its 101st year in existence. So that patterns with the time that the federal government has been investing in then vocational education and now career technical education. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that is a membership organization of states, and I'm pleased to say that all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the U.S. territories are members. And we represent the full span of career technical education. And often what we find when people are learning about and interested in CTE, they know pieces of it, but they don't understand the breadth of CTE, that it touches every aspect of our economy, that it starts in some states as far back as upper elementary school, middle school, high school, post-secondary education, and adult workforce. And right now, Alice, you mentioned the economy and the need to upskill and reskill, and CTE is central to that work as well. Our work as a national organization is to listen and learn and be a way to help others network and find out what are the best practices out there and support that implementation. And we do that by working on federal policy, in state policy and technical assistance, and as I said, curating those best practices. the work that we do as CTE leaders connects with and touches a lot of other systems. We connect with the K-12 and post-secondary education system, as I mentioned, the workforce development system, and the economic development system as well. And so we do work that spans all of those spaces and places and try to support our members in leading with equity and quality at the center. The last thing that I'll just say is that as a national organization, we not only support leaders, but we try to lead ourselves, and we aspire to do that by trying to model what we hope would happen in states. And so we aspire to be forward-leaning and forward-looking. Again, as I said, fiercely committed to quality and equity, and collaborative in the creation and execution of measurable results and impact. I think that that piece about collaboration is so important. The challenges that we face as a country, as an education system, as an economy, cannot be solved by one component of the education system, although obviously you all wrote talking points that I love to hear about CTE. We know that we're a piece of the solution, a strong and powerful piece, but we are really much a partner with many others in accomplishing these important goals. So thank you for having me.
Love it. Thank you so much. And speaking of collaboration, my first question is for the Lieutenant Governor, and really centers around collaboration that you built and led in the new construction skills training program for Baltimore City youth at Carver Vocational Tech High School. And I would love to hear a little more about how that program came about and about how you worked to bring together and build collaboration among the key stakeholders that it took to get that off the ground.
Oh, okay, thank you. And you know, as Dr. Sandelices can tell you, it took a little bit of time, but you know, you have to bring everyone together. Carver has been the initial location, but we're working to expand to a different school. And of course, COVID interrupted a lot of things, including this program. But I was, you know, struck. I've been concerned about training for people to go into the professional skill trades for a long period of time. And even though the CTE courses are out there in the different schools, there had been, you know, I'm going to use kind of the old guy comments here. There had been a movement away from the trades training that were in the schools back in the old days when I was in school, when they were called vocational training and we had vocational schools. And so I was a little concerned about that, because knowing the workforce challenges that our state and the nation have with regard to those skilled trades, I was, you know, the feeling was this is an avenue for, you know, to make a very good wage. And you also develop that entrepreneurial class. And I like to also say, and it's somewhat of a joke, but somewhat true, and that is, and I'll start it as a joke, that you know, a lawyer calls the HVAC repair person because his air conditioner broke down on the hottest day of the year, which is when it usually happens. And the HVAC repairman came out. He worked for about an hour and a half, pretty close to 2 hours, and then gave the lawyer the invoice. And the invoice was for $925. And the lawyer said, "I don't even charge that much, and I'm a Harvard-trained lawyer." And the repairman said, "Well, I understand. I didn't charge that much either when I was a lawyer." So it's kind of, you know, it becomes that entrepreneurial class, and anyone who has had to get a repair of their air conditioning on the 4th of July weekend knows that you will pay whatever they ask you to pay. But I was at a lieutenant governor's conference, and the Home Builders Institute, or foundation, gave a presentation about the need for skilled professionals and what they were doing to try to address that challenge. And they pointed out that they were looking at 3 particular demographic groups: returning veterans coming back into the workforce, individuals coming out of the criminal justice system, as well as what they call disadvantaged youth. And so I took the time to go up and talk to the presenters and asked them, had they done any work in Maryland? Thinking in terms of Baltimore City as the initial place. And they hadn't, but they had done some work. They weren't doing anything in Maryland, but they had done some work in Baltimore City many, many years ago. And were interested in coming back. And what they had said was that they would provide virtually everything. They needed just the space. The space was what they needed, but they could provide an instructor if that's needed. They could provide the equipment if that is needed. They just needed the space. And so with that, I reached out to Dr. Sandelices, who was very interested in the program and the approach. And I think, as she mentioned, they were going through an audit at that particular time, but also trying to decide what is the best place for the location, at least to start it as a pilot. And during those conversations, I also started thinking that in our juvenile services group, we have kids who are out on parole and probation who are in class during the day, but they report to juvenile services in the evening because they're under supervision of juvenile services. And started to think, could we do kind of a two-tier, address, in one school, the daytime kids who may be interested in the program, and in the evening, the kids who are coming in for supervision with juvenile services who are interested, and juvenile services would provide the transportation to get those kids to the location because they would come from all over the city. So we started to talk about that as well and working with Dr. Sandelices. And so we were ready to go, and then COVID hit and threw everything off. But this past summer, and Dr. Sandelices can correct me, we restarted the program. I have to be corrected on timeframes because all these days just run this together unless I look at a calendar. I believe it was this summer or late spring, probably summer, that we were able to start with those kids who are in juvenile services supervisory conditions. So we started with them. We're hoping to expand back to the daytime kids. I say K through 12, but it's really the high school kids, probably starting with, I think we start with 10th graders, maybe 9th, 10th and 11th graders. So that's how we came about, and very excited about it. Had an opportunity to visit the kids who were in that first grouping, and you could see how proud they were from the work that they were doing. The things they were building, they built the staircase, they were building smaller models of houses, just understanding, the construction process. And then lastly, I want to say that, one of the things that attracted me also to the home builders, aside from the fact that they would pay for virtually everything, was that the Home Builders Institute is a part of the National Home Builders Association. So they have members all over the country and members in Maryland. There's a chapter in Maryland. So that is a pathway to employment with some of the home builders that are in the state and already looking for talent. So it is an opportunity for these kids to come out with a certification saying they've gone through the home builders program and be able to present it to some of the local home builders and construction companies to say, hey, take me into an apprenticeship program of something of that nature, that they can start off making over $20 an hour, and in a couple of years they could very well be in $35 an hour, at a time before their fellow people are graduating from college with debt and working at Starbucks. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. So thank you. That's a long story, I know.
That's a long story, but a great story. And talk about a win-win. Just seems like such a good idea. The next question is actually to hear even more about this from Dr. Sandelices from the district perspective, particularly around sort of the public-private partnership aspect of this. And I'm interested from your perspective, what makes a partnership like this successful? And can you also speak more to the challenges in this moment that the Lieutenant Governor referred to with the pandemic, and where do we go from here?
No, and it really does have challenging times, that we're in the midst of challenging times that require creativity, and I will speak to that. But I do want to emphasize the real critical elements from a school district perspective of what the Lieutenant Governor just described in his story, and that is the willingness of the private and the public sector to come together to provide the real work opportunities for young people that are direct connections into our economy. And so we actually can't do that alone as a school system. And one of the things that we found is that this giving students the opportunity for those marketable skills means that we need people who have an understanding of the landscape, an understanding of the workforce. So in the HBI example that the Lieutenant Governor referenced, right, you have people who understand what the industry is with regards to home building, and in addition to the national connections, they understand the landscape in the state of Maryland, right? So young people are immediately able to see what the application of their skills looks like. So a lot of our partners really do help to validate kind of the teaching of those right skills. We know from a lot of our young people that the real world work-based learning experiences are a major hook for our young people. And it really helps when they have professionals in these areas who are working alongside them. They're coming in contact with them. And I think on the public sector side, having at the state level, the Lieutenant Governor be able to help harness and make those connections was incredibly helpful. Here in the city, we are also working with the Mayor's Office of Employment Development. And so one of the things we've been able to do in the city of Baltimore is we have one of the largest summer employment programs in the country for Baltimore's young people ages 14 to 21. And so what that enables us to do is with the employment office to connect our CTE students to job opportunities aligned with their learning in school. And then as well, in a number of cases, young people who would not have been engaged in summer school because they would not want to miss out on a work opportunity, we're now able to align some school time, whether it's recovery or acceleration, with actual on the ground job opportunities. And we wouldn't be able to do that unless we were, able to work with the Mayor's Office of Educational Development to actually connect us with those employers. Because we don't solely have the capacity to do that. On the private sector side, Baltimore Gas and Electric, BGE, has been a fabulous partner. And not only do they regularly hire our students, which in and of itself is a hook, because we all know with young people, word spreads fast, that, if you go through this program, if you get an internship here, it leads to a job. That's incentive for young people to engage in school. And so, for example, BGE has helped cover the cost of making sure that our plumbing teacher each year is supported through their generous grant. And then that plumbing program also has application to some of the network work, right? So actually networking technologically, with computer systems, we're all talking about broadband. BG&E, worked with our office to actually see that there are applications not only in plumbing, but also in technology. And it's that kind of know-how within the ground that we get to see. And then I think the best thing about these partnerships, again, as the Lieutenant Governor described, is that they really can meet the needs of our local community. When we got to sit down with HBI, with the Lieutenant Governor, we got to talk about what we were actually seeing as some of the needs in our local community. And then we pulled together a lot of folks on that team. And I think another great example, I don't know if the Lieutenant Governor knows this, but our current team that's working, we actually have one who is a local baseball coach, another who is an architecture professor at a local university, and they've pulled together a team to engage students in renovating a vacant home across the street from the school. So this is a way that we're really able to instill our students with that kind of change. And then finally, Alice, because you asked about the impact of the pandemic, we've had the opportunity, to see some silver linings and opportunities in this space. So we've done far more virtually. So virtual introductions to different career paths for some of our middle school students. In some areas, we've been able to for the first time, really go through with, kind of a visual or a distance learning. But in other cases, frankly, this is why we've prioritized CTE students for a return to school. So what we saw is that, for example, Vivian T. Thomas High School that specializes in medical careers, they were one of the first schools in November to open back up for small groups of CTE students, because we knew young people would not be able to hit their certification benchmarks if we did not give them time back in school. And so, when we, not to get in the back and forth about it, but I think when we are looking at yes, the opportunities that virtual learning has presented, we also have to balance that out with what our young people are missing if we're not providing them access to those skill building experiences that we know are going to lead to certification, because certification's the commodity of exchange if we want young people to be able to walk into jobs.
That is so encouraging. Thank you. Moving on to Kim, we've heard about such a great local example in Maryland, but you have visibility beyond Maryland as well, and would love to hear more from your perspective about how other states are working to set statewide policies that strengthen CTE and strengthen these kinds of programs for vulnerable populations. What are you seeing, and what can Maryland learn from that?
Well, thank you. And I just want to say, so many times, I just wanted to applaud when the Lieutenant Governor and Dr. Santelises was speaking, because kind of what they're describing is the power and promise of high quality CTE. And we do see that happening across the country. It does happen collaboratively with private and public sector. It does happen in every sector of the economy. And I think the roots of high quality CTE are deeply local in terms of that connection that has to be made with community leaders, as well as employers. But that state framework that is there, I think, does actually provide an important backstop, particularly for making sure that there's a priority and a focus on those vulnerable populations that you talked about, Alice. One of the things that states were working on right before COVID hit was finalizing their state plans for the federal funding that states and local communities get around career technical education. It's called the Perkins Act. It's about $1.3 billion of funding that goes out to states based on a population and poverty formula. And it's really about driving change in our community. It's not about supporting the mainstay programs, but making sure that CTE is staying on the cutting edge and is driving forward kind of the work and the needs, because CTE is not a static entity. It needs to be responding to the environment and the economy and the changing needs of the labor market. And so that's costly. And it's a place that the federal government does help contribute, certainly not in any way near enough money, but it helps contribute to move the field forward. And so we had a chance to look at all 50 states' plans. And one of the things that we were so pleased to see was this centering around not only quality of CTE, and as was discussed earlier, that responsiveness to the labor market, but really broadening the focus of who we consider vulnerable populations. In the past, the history of the federal government's focus in CTE has really been around gender equity. And now we see a much more expansive focus to include race and ethnicity, disability status, socioeconomic status, and geographic access to programs. And we know also kind of the undergirding that COVID has revealed of the access to broadband and transportation and food insecurity, all of that gets connected together. So I want to just kind of share some examples around three big themes that we saw of states. One is around a focus of technical assistance and professional development. Another is around data and accountability. And the last is around systems collaboration. So we all know we're dealing in a state of a lot of systemic kind of trauma, whether it is the economy, whether it is the shifts in the education system, whether it is health crises. And so Oregon has been doing a lot of work to try to empower and support its educators to build trauma-informed practices into CTE programs and make sure that we have culturally responsive teaching methods in all of our CTE classrooms. Wyoming is doing work around making sure that their educators are prepared to support students with disabilities as they enter in that important work-based learning experiences that was shared earlier. And making sure that also the employer community is prepared to be welcoming and inclusive of students with disabilities on work-based learning placements. Regarding data and accountability, to me, I think anybody who does work around quality and equity, we all know that we have to be driven by what the data is revealing to us. And Rhode Island has done some really great work of making sure that they're looking at their data. And they, as we look at data nationally around CTE, participation in CTE generally mirrors the overall makeup of our national population, the demographics of our national population. But importantly, when you start to look at that data by the career clusters, we start to see pretty significant gaps. An oversubscription of certain people in some career clusters and undersubscription of certain populations in other clusters. So Rhode Island, and I think Maryland actually does have a really good data dashboard as well, is really using their data to drive resources. And they're actually having a set of their federal funding go out to focus on closing equity gaps. And I'll also say in Ohio, they've done some interesting work around putting in an equity ambassador program that is making sure that there is an individual within each of their CTE program planning districts that can be an anchor, a point of reference, an expert that people can go to help lead courageous conversations and be able to connect the data with policy. And lastly, I'll just say on the systems collaboration space, this is a space that the federal law expanded, as I mentioned, the populations that we're focusing on. And Montana really took up this charge by including and creating a statewide kind of advisory group that it includes their state advisor on homeless youth. It includes the individuals that are working in the state foster care system, as well as their students and their staff with disabilities, and also bringing learner voice in. So it's not that adage of don't do it to us, bring us along and help us have a voice in crafting solutions. So they are bringing that learner voice to this advisory group to make sure that they're crafting solutions that are centered on equity and quality. And the last thing I'll just say, it's not a piece that's in the works, but it's not finalized, but it's a piece that Dr. Santelises spoke to as well, is this issue about admissions. So for public education and for CTE for a long time, we, as a way of trying to improve quality, put in admissions requirements. And that has had a negative impact on having CTE be accessible to all and every learner population. The state of Massachusetts, which is often #1 in CTE across the country in their regional vocational high schools, is taking this issue on and trying to, like Maryland, try to eliminate those admissions requirements to make sure that it is more accessible for all learners. And there's more that I can say, but I'll just leave that at that. There's a lot of great things happening around the country, and there's a lot more work to still be done, especially to make sure that our vulnerable populations are being served.
Thank you. So the questions from the audience are pouring in. So we're going to turn to some of those now. And the first is to you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. And that is, how are states and districts supporting the growth of CTE programs in industries that are primed for growth, such as renewable energy? And how can we recruit historically underserved students into these programs?
Well, I think, well, let me just start with where we've, started with Baltimore City Schools and have introduced it to at least a couple of other school districts to think about it as well, has been more in the construction trade. But those skill sets are the same things that will be needed for the renewable energy side. You need to, be an electrician. You're going to hire an electrician to, work with any renewable energy source, no matter how you're going to develop it, be it wind, solar, geothermal. And the same for when you talk geothermal, you're going to be needing people who have plumbing skills. So it's going to be the same basic understanding of these skill sets. So if you're installing, let's say, solar panels, which are made someplace else generally, you have to have the basic carpentry skills and the construction skills and understanding those things. And one of the main focuses of the program that we utilize is just the safety aspects. So the basic skills that you're going to pick up in these CTE programs, and we're talking about at the high school level, so remember that, are skill sets that are going to be foundational skills for any of the industries that may come down the pike that have to do with building things and installing things and maintaining equipment. So, maybe there'll be some specialty areas to develop, but you still are going to need to have that plumbing, the electrical skills, and construction or carpentry skills. So let's not get too focused on, the shiny new object, but understand the basics. As I used to say, the reading, writing, and arithmetic. If you got to get those foundational skills to be able to move on to these more, I don't want to say exotic, but these more detailed and specific areas.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Kim, we have a question for you related to the pandemic. COVID has made in-person apprenticeships and projects that are often a component of CTE difficult to impossible. We know this is an ongoing issue in rural districts where travel is required to access these opportunities. What systems and solutions can districts and states implement to ensure access to CTE for all students?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I will say we have seen a lot of innovation, but there are no wholesale answers that are going to work every place. But actually what we've seen is that in rural communities, they have had an easier time actually attending to continuing CTE in times of COVID, because they've been able to have fewer numbers of students in labs and experiences and kind of keep to the guidelines of how many individuals should be convening at one time. But the issues around being able to have access to the virtual component of CTE, which a lot of places, that's where they first pivoted to doing the classroom-based instruction and making that pivot virtually, has been a challenge given access to equipment and broadband. This is true not just for CTE, for all aspects of education. And we are concerned about the ability to then be able to pivot back into workplaces. I mean, my workplace is still remote, right? So how do we make sure that young people are able to go back safely? And I think that's been what's been top of mind for policy leaders. There are actually, I think, a few places that we're seeing this disruptive innovation try to push the envelope a little bit in terms of areas where we might embed augmented and virtual reality into some aspects of our programs. And I think that is a place and space that we can be investing in more. However, I do not think that is a substitute for the actual practical hands-on application. I would not want somebody, fixing the brakes on my car that's only ever done it in a virtual environment. So, and in fact, most industry certifications require that in-person demonstration of skills. So I don't know that we have the answers. There's been a lot of people trying to put solutions in place and trying to build out the use of technology and trying to create some creative solutions with swapping students in and out of labs. But the integration of going back into the workplace has been a slower start and something that people are still working through.
Yep. Thank you. We have another great question from the audience. This one for Dr. Sandelices. we've talked a lot about developing programs that can benefit our vulnerable students, but we know it's not enough to design them and then passively hope for enrollment. How can we get the word out to students and their families to explore these opportunities? And as we do that, how do we change the perception that some parents may have that CTE is less than a more traditional school path?
No, those are great questions, Alice. And some of what we've been working on, particularly during this period of pandemic, is how do we actually expose our middle school students earlier to some of those options. When we did our review, one of the things we heard from parents, we heard from the community, and was a result of our audit, was that really our middle schools had become almost emaciated in the ability and opportunities, right, for middle school students to explore careers. So, you know, I understand I'm older than, you know, a lot of our students now, but, you know, it used to be standard fare that in middle school, no matter what you thought you might be doing in 4 years, you had exposure to different kinds of careers. And so we are increasingly having partnerships that are focused on middle school, focused on overall career readiness. So even if you are in a quote, you know, even if you do want to go straight to post-secondary study, having career readiness, what we were finding from employers in Baltimore City was that all kids needed that kind of exposure. So I think that's part of what we've done, is really revamping our overall career readiness and saying, this is something all students need to participate in, regardless of what you're going to do after graduation. And then the whole perception from families. Locally, again, we benefit from Baltimore City having a strong tradition of CTE careers and entrepreneurship, as the Lieutenant Governor referenced. But one of the things that we've really been doing is, and I think has been helpful, frankly, in the work in CTE in previous years, is sharing some of the same data, Alice, that you were sharing, where we're telling, you know, we're able to say to parents, look, actually in CTE, you are more likely to enroll in post-secondary study because you see the application of what you're studying to what you're actually doing. Second, one of my favorite things too, and, you know, I've had this discussion with community members, you know, and occasionally I'll get, you know, even a quip from someone, well, you know, not everybody, you know, is going to be great in math, so we need to have trades. And what we do is we stop, you know, I've stopped in the middle of community sessions and said, well, I need to tell you, being a mechanic now is not what being a mechanic was 45 years ago. And I'll never forget visiting an electrician's program in New York City, and taking some of my senior team with me. And when we walked around and you looked at the complex circuitry that those young people were doing and the level of math that they needed to have to be able to complete that, it begins to kind of break away this notion that, well, you don't have to be so good in school or it's lesser. It's actually just the opposite, that you need the book knowledge of that foundational knowledge of reading and writing well and having solid math, but then you also have to be able to apply it. So what we've benefited from is actually the narrowing of the gap of the level of skill you need to have to enter into a number of fields, as well as, frankly, some of the college entrance criteria. So we don't have this large gap between the two. It's more about application. And I think as parents get to see the different engagement level, as we are tracking data, and I think also the shift to certification. I mean, keep in mind, when we did our study in 2018, I almost cried when I realized that, you know, 26% of graduates in Baltimore City right after graduation, the September after graduation, were neither in work or school. So it's not as if we were pulling young people away from something. They were doing nothing, right? They were just out. And then, you know, a median income of $15,000 a year, 6 years after graduation, you know, that's enough to make you tear. You can't support a family on $15,000 a year. So some of those figures, I think, really help with the case making and combining with making sure families and students have exposure early, beginning again, minimally in middle school, if not before.
Could I add one thing to that? Because I think the other piece that I would add to this is that you've also done the work around making sure the programs you offer are quality, right? And I think this is one of the challenges, is to rebuild trust with communities that have historically vocational education was done to them, is that we need to make sure that the programs that students are entering in are quality, which means, frankly, shutting down things that are not high quality. And that is a hard thing to do in public education, but it's something that bold leaders like yourself have done. And we need more of those people to do that, is saying, like, we've done a national survey of parents and students across the country, and we describe how high quality CTE, everybody wants it, but not high quality CTE exists in every district. And so the work is to be done to lift them up, or say, no longer do we need these programs.
That is such a great point. And to Dr. Sandelisa's point about the middle school exposure to this, I do have to take a moment to brag about something we do in Anne Arundel County, which is all middle school students have a field trip in 9th grade to CAT South, or the Center for Applied Technology South, which is just a remarkable school. I remember both my kids came home, just couldn't stop talking about it and how incredible it was. But seeing it firsthand, you know, they have more kids that want to go there than they actually have space some years, which is awesome. So we do have another question for you, Kim, around what, speaking of students, about what role career and tech student organizations play in bringing students to these programs. And what do you think they can do to help strengthen the diversity within the programs?
Yeah, so I don't know if everybody listening knows what career technical student organizations are. They are co-curricular, so they're not just extracurricular, but co-curricular programs that are organized around different kind of industry themes. And they help students, as we were just talking about, really apply their classroom learning in real world settings. And they often have a component of a competition, and those competitions are often judged by employers. And usually the students who are gold medal winners are snatched up with jobs before they're even able to graduate from their programs. So I think that career technical student organizations, if you described a high quality CTE program, every student would have a career technical student organization experience. Because in addition to what I described, it also helps students build those leadership skills, because they're running a student-led organization, and they have usually a community service component to them. So I think when we look at that full package of skills, not just the technical skills, students get that through them. Are they a way to help diversify students? I would like to say yes. I'm not sure. I think that, you know, participation in a student organization costs money. And so one of the things that we have seen and that states have struggled with is making sure that access to career technical student organizations is equitable in districts that are lower on the economic basis as compared to kind of high income, often suburban communities. So I think they are an on-ramp to exposing students to CTE and to a variety of options in CTE, but I think the financing of them often is something that might get in the way for them being fully leveraged as an on-ramp for diversifying CTE programs. So something to work on.
Yes, great. Thank you. So in the interest of time, I see we've got 5 minutes left, and I know Kyle has some closing remarks. So last question, and this is something that has been touched on, but would love to hear your thoughts, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, and then if the other panelists want to chime back in with any final words of wisdom, that would be great. But I think my biggest takeaway today, and will date myself a little bit, but you know, the CTE of today, it's not your father's Oldsmobile, right? It is something so different from when we were kids. And, you know, there's so much promise and possibility. But how do we best show that to students, to parents, to communities? What is out there now in a way that the students who can benefit most really do take advantage of these opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point. I mean, and given the car example is a good example. I mean, and I think I outdate everybody else on this panel in terms of going back, because it wasn't even middle school when I was in what we called junior high school at the time. And also when you look at the cars, I can remember my first car that I bought for $325 used, an old Mustang that if I lifted up the hood, I could see the engine and the ground. Now with the car, you lift up the hood, you don't even see the spark plugs. It's a very different situation. It's very computerized. The cars are, computerized. And so it's getting to, and I think it's been said before, getting to the parents that are thinking that it is the old vocational training. It is that you don't need to have the book learning skills. If you can work with your hands, that's all that's needed. It is very different. And I think for the kids, it's the application. Dr. Sandalisi, mentioned that. I think the child who really is probably not putting as much effort into mathematics because they're saying, oh, I'm just not that good in math. So they don't even really try that hard. When they see the application of it, and understand that this is, these circuits, this is something that you may understand already in terms of just how to make it work. You just don't know the theory behind how it works. And it may encourage them to go in that direction. I think for the parents, it is talking to them about the fact that if their child it does not want to go to college right away, it may or may not. I mean, one is to give the statistics that you all have all provided in terms of the benefits that the kids that graduate, the percentage of them that do go to college, the high percentage that graduate to begin with. But also to point out, like my earlier joke, was that kid who decides, okay, I'm not really interested in going to college. I'm going to go into this apprenticeship program to be an electrician or a carpenter or plumber or auto technician. They don't call them mechanics anymore. They in 4 years will be making more money with no debt than what that person that went to some private college paying $60-some thousand a year, and they studied what it was that they wanted to study, which was a big fight I had with my daughter when she was in college. And they come out and they're struggling to find a job, and they have debt up to their eyeballs, and so it's a career path that if they decide to go back to school, because they're going to have to do continuous education anyway, go back to school full time, they will go back to school with money in their pocket and far more mature than they were when they were 18 years old. So exposure, I think, helps to both the parents as well as the kids, and the middle school is a very good way to start that process.
Yes. Well, I think that is a great note to end on. So I'm going to turn it back to Kyle to close us out. And thank you all so much. This has been really informative and helpful and really inspiring. So thanks for all you're doing for our kids and our state.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Alice, and thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us today. Special thanks to our panelists, Lieutenant Governor Rutherford, Dr. Santelises, and Ms. Green, for what really was a fantastic conversation. I just want to say the CTE community is so passionate and engaged, as evidenced by how many amazing questions we got in our Q&A today. And I'm always so excited when we get to jump into great conversations like this. We're sorry if we weren't able to get to all of your questions, but feel free to tweet it using the hashtag GovPrinciples, and we'll do our best to answer it online. We'll post a recording of this webinar as well as a recap to our Hunt Institute blog in the next few days. Please check back for that and feel free to share with your networks. We also have a few webinars coming up that are sort of continuing on the theme we had today of engaging learners who are often left behind. Next week's post-secondary pathways webinar is going to feature a discussion on how we engage adult learners. And next Thursday, our innovation in education webinar will tackle providing equitable education for students with disabilities. Finally, for all of our loyal governing principles listeners out there, the next webinar in this series will be on February 11th at 1 p.m. We'll focus on assessment and accountability. We hope to see you there. Additionally, we have a few resources surrounding the ever-evolving education landscape amidst COVID-19. We're frequently updating this page. The link should be up here on the PowerPoint. We've got new content coming across the education continuum, so if you haven't checked it out in a while, I would encourage you to come back and see what's new. Once the webinar closes, you'll be brought to a survey page. We ask you please share any thoughts you have with us so we continue to make this series and all of our other webinars as great as they can possibly be. Thanks so much, everyone. Hope you have a wonderful day and a great weekend.